So this is our, like I said before, we've been talking about the theory of evolution. Some people kind of got some parts of it even before we ever talked about it, I'm sure. Okay, and usually most people don't understand it completely. It's pretty complex, by the way. There's a lot of things that are included in it, so you always have to keep that in mind. And we're going to just talk about the basic parts of it today, and this isn't going to be all that long. Okay, so theory of evolution, it was proposed by Charles Darwin. And when I say proposed, it was put into a paper. So people had been talking and writing about this idea for years before him, but he was the first one that actually put it into a document and published it in a scientific community. And that's how a lot of things work in science. Like if you have a new idea, you might write a research paper on it, you share it with certain groups, they read it, they give you feedback on it, and then you might tweak it a little bit, but then it might, after that, you might write a book on it like he did. He wrote a book, Charles Darwin. Does anybody know the name of it? The book he wrote?
Is that like, I don't.
It's called Origin of Species. I'll put it down here actually. So it's called Origin of Species. Pretty famous book. It really shook the world when it came out. So Origin of Species. And there's more to the title, just know that part of it. So Origin of Species. But he was the first one that really put it into a format of a book and a research paper, and people, it was widespread. And at first it was not accepted. Okay? So this idea, at first, people said, that's not true. Okay? And maybe we'll talk in a minute why that was so. But there was other people that had worked on this theory. Okay? And this theory really talks about where do we come from? Where do organisms come from? You know, are this organism related to that organism? That's really what this theory is talking about. And some people that had worked on it were Malthus, Lamarck, and then there was some other people I'm not going to include. But Malthus was somebody at the same time as Darwin had come out with his theory. Malthus had printed a paper or published a paper as well. So they kind of give them almost, Malthus and Darwin are kind of like joined together. So they both get credit really for this theory in the end. They remember Darwin because he's the one that kind of, he wrote the book on it and so on. But really, Malthus had the same idea as Darwin. It just didn't get as much notoriety. Okay? And Lamarck was the guy. Does anybody remember who he is? Okay. So Lamarck was the guy that said organisms inherit species from their parents. So like say Jackson's mom likes to lift weights. And she lifts weights, and then she has Jackson as a baby, and she gets muscular, you know, and then she has Jackson. It says that when he's born, he'll be more muscular because she was working out. Okay? No, that's not true, right?
But if you're like fat, does that work too? Like
well, they would say it might. Okay, so and the example they usually use for Lamarck is the idea of a giraffe. Like so, a giraffe had a certain length of neck, and then it would stretch its neck, and then it would pass that longer neck on to its child. Then it would stretch its neck a little more, and then it would pass that on. Well, that's not true. That's not how it works. You can't acquire a characteristic, and that's really his theory, acquired characteristics. You can't acquire a characteristic and then pass it on. So if Jackson lifts weights and becomes like Mr. Universe, and becomes really muscular, that has nothing to do with the muscular nature of his child. It won't. Okay? You don't pass that on. Okay? And really it's talking about genetics. That's how you pass traits on. Okay? That's what Lamarck, so people kind of laughed at him, but he kind of had a similar idea to Darwin, but not quite. So really the four ideas that theory of evolution is based on, some common ideas, is that all animals come from a single ancestor. Okay? That's really one of the big premises of this whole idea. Okay? So, and it will be like this. So there's a one-celled organism here, and it gave rise, and I'm abbreviating here, to inverts, and then inverts, other inverts, but then maybe a vertebrate. Okay, and then different types of vertebrates like cats, and then maybe mammals. That's actually a mammal, so mammal's not a good one. But we'll say reptiles is better. So, but they all, the theory has the idea or the thought that everything started with one organism and then everything branched off. Okay? That's kind of the common descent, that everything comes from one organism. So when the Earth, this theory says, or tries to say, that when the Earth was first formed and there was no life, things came together, they formed a single-celled organism. Those single-celled organisms then changed, and they evolved into different organisms, and over time they evolved, and eventually you get all these really complex organisms. Okay, that's the common descent idea, though, that we all came from one single organism that started it all. Okay, are you on your phone? No, what is in your laptop? All right, good. Okay, so number 2, all organisms get characteristics from their parents, and that has to do with genetics. And Darwin knew that. He thought that. So when he went to the Galapagos Islands and looked at tortoises and birds and different types of things like that, he realized that when one turtle gave birth to another one, it looked something like its parents. And Darwin was actually, when he was around 1860s, there were still horses and farms and all that kind of stuff. So he realized, that from being from a farm himself, I think he was, but he had seen farms, and he knew that when a horse gave birth to another horse, it looked like its parents usually, had some characteristics like its parents. So the idea that each organism gets characteristics from its parents. Okay? What it looks like is dependent upon its parents. Okay? And then also he noticed this was variation among organisms. So when you look at, even if you look in your class in your school, if you look at all the boys in 9th grade, there's tons of variation. If you look at dogs, if you look at if you go to a place that sells like different types of dogs, but they're the same type of dog, if you look at them, they're not all exactly the same. They have a different type of variation. And you can even go outside and look at birds, and you can see all the same black-capped chickadees, but they're all just a little different. You can see a little bit.
Is that how we have like interspecies, like
What's that?
stuff like a tiger and a lion? Is that how we have like tiger and lions, and they mate and they have like a liger or whatever?
I don't think that's real.
So we have that.
I think that's made up.
No, that's real. That's 100% real.
Okay, so I think a lion and a tiger, though, I think they don't mate in captivity.
Yeah, they do.
I don't think so. But people can take them. So a guy in a zoo can take a sperm from a lion and an egg from a tiger and combine them. I'd be surprised. I'm not sure. I'm not going to argue it. But
We should look that up
understand
sometime.
I don't think, and we can talk about that later, but a liger, I think it's called, right?
Yeah.
So I think people do that. And people used to do that in the farm. They used to take different sperm and put them together with the exact organism they wanted to. But many organisms, and I don't know about a tiger and a lion, I'm not sure. I've never researched into it. I've heard of them. But I know that a lot of organisms cannot, just wait, we'll talk about that in a minute. So, but a lot of organisms, if you tried to do that, it won't work. It's just, the DNA isn't just quite right, and so on. And sometimes the gametes, we'll talk about that. But there's variation among organisms. So when we're talking about organisms, though, we're talking about the same species. Okay? That's a good point here. So same species. So that means we're not talking about lions and tigers. We're talking about tigers. When you look at tigers, there's different variations of tigers. They're all tigers, but they all have a little bit different characteristics. When we look at lions, they all have different characteristics as well. But among them, there's variation. Okay? And those variations come from two things. They come from mutations. So every organism has DNA, and DNA has to be copied over and over again to produce new cells. And when a young tiger becomes an adult tiger, it gets bigger, so it has to produce new cells. And each cell has to have a copy of DNA. It copies it. Sometimes it makes mistakes because there's like millions of base pairs matching up. It might make a mistake, and that could cause a mutation in the tiger to look a little different than the other tiger. But what also does it are gametes, and this gametes are sperm, the male, and the female egg is the egg. And so your traits that you have, are dependent on your mother and your father. You get half your DNA from your father and half your DNA from your mother. It then comes together and that determines the traits that you have. Sometimes you look just like your father. Sometimes you look just like your mother. Sometimes you look a little bit like each of them. Sometimes you don't look like any of them, neither one of them. And it depends on what DNA you get. Okay? So the variation we see among organisms is dependent on those two things. There's mutations that occur, and then our DNA that we get, each organism is from their parents, and it's melded together. There's two different sections of DNA is melded together to produce a new organism. Okay? So, and then survival of the fittest. Okay? And that has to do with nature choosing the best traits or natural selection. So if we go back here, so we know that in theory of evolution, they say we all come from one common ancestor. Okay? We get all of our DNA from that, right? That's what they say. And is everything's DNA the same? I mean, so if we looked at just a skeletal structure of all DNA, so does a plant have the same basic structure of DNA as an animal? It does. I mean, it has different sections, but it all has 4 base pairs, and it all has a sugar that holds it together and a hydrogen bond. It's all the same structure. So whether you're a plant, an animal, whether you're a tree, or whether you're a monkey, your DNA is basically the same setup. Now they all have different base pairs, okay? And that makes everything look a little different, or behave differently, but that's where they get the idea of common descent. So, because when they look at DNA, it's all the same, pretty much. And in fact, if you look at a plant and an animal, the DNA is very similar, even though they don't look like each other at all. There's a lot of DNA they don't even know what it is. They just know it's a bunch of base pairs. They can't tell you whether it codes for a gene, and so on. They can tell you what it is, like it's a guanine or cytosine, which are base pairs, but they can't tell you exactly what some of it does, and they usually call it junk DNA. Like they say it doesn't do anything. That's just because they don't know what it does. I mean, maybe someday that'll change. Okay, so then all organisms get their characteristics from their parents. So that's the idea. The theory says we all came from one organism. That organism passed on its traits. Okay, and then as they pass on the traits through DNA and mutations occur, there's a variation of species or variation among species. So they're all not exactly alike. And then they all get little different characteristics. And then depending on the environment, some species are better fitted for that environment, and some aren't quite as good. And the ones that are better fitted for the environment can survive and get food, survive the winter, and then they can then reproduce, and then they pass their traits on. Okay? That's the theory of evolution in like a nutshell. And what chooses that? It was always before Darwin. It was, well, how does that occur? Who chooses it? Who says whether this tiger lives or this tiger lives? Well, Darwin's idea was that it's nature. The environment itself chooses what traits it prefers to others. Okay? And those are kind of terms they use. They say nature prefers, but nature is a static thing. It doesn't choose or say, I like this one better. It just exists. And then that determines, according to this theory, what survives and what doesn't. Okay? But with any organ...
Have you heard of the...
Yes, question?
Have you heard of the Darwin Award?
I have not.
It's like the family gets it, like whoever commits suicide, like really funny or stupidly by accident, they give that out to people.
I've never heard that. That's interesting.
Yeah, Mr. Berner taught me about it freshman year.
Oh, did he? Okay. So yeah, and again, this is kind of some of this stuff is controversial, and you can see kind of why, where all that is rooted in. Some of the Scopes thing kind of showed you that, where. And a lot of it has to do with different things. There's different reasons why people don't like this idea. And some of these ideas they go against the grain. Like some of the things that are being said here, they might say it offends people. So, and maybe it's true, and maybe it's not. I don't know. Okay? I have an opinion, I think, but it is a theory that you should know how it works, okay, whether you agree or disagree. And yeah, I think it was like the 100th anniversary, like, how many years ago? It was 150. It was like 18 something. Yeah, it must have been 200 or something. But a lot of people make fun of Darwin, and some people even say this theory needs a little tweaking because it's off. Some of the things they say in there aren't quite true what they're saying. Okay, but that's the theory of evolution in a nutshell. Common descent, genetics, variation, and natural selection. If you understand those four things, you really understand the theory, I would say, in a nutshell. Any questions? Okay.